Hello, it's Scott Manley here. It's 11 o'clock on March 20th. There's going to be a rocket launch in about 30 minutes, and I have just enough time to record another batch of deep space updates. And of course, talking about rocket launches, we have to rewind and talk about those. So we go back to the 6th of March, a very busy day, which started with the launch of Ariane 6-2. That means the two-booster version of Ariane out of Kourou, carrying a satellite into sun-synchronous orbit. This was a French military, observation reconnaissance satellite called Composante Spatiale Optique. Yes, so this is like their third generation, surveillance satellites. The first real, proper. It's the second flight of Ariane, actual commercial or whatever, actual functional operational flight, no longer a test flight. So yeah, 6th also featured the launch of Starship IFT-8, the 8th flight, which pretty much turned out to be an almost mirror image, a repeat, let's say, of Flight 7, with the V2 Starship, well, looking a lot more like a V2 rocket, descending through the atmosphere spectacularly, but unfortunately for all the people that have worked on it. So it's very clear that the fixes which were made to the booster to stop the vibrations, the harmonic resonance, were not able to fix the root cause of the problem. And so we're not sure what's going to happen for flight number 9, but we would really like to see them actually get over this hump and get into orbit. I have a whole other video on that, and of course there's lots of really amazing footage that came out of it. They did catch the booster though, so maybe we'll see that getting reflown at some point. Anyway, moving onwards. On the 9th of March, we had a Long March 3B/E carrying TJS-17 out of Chichang to geostationary transfer orbit. So the TJS is Tongsen Jishu Xian, which means Communications Technology Test, and it is a military satellite for China. 11th of March, we had a Long March 8. That was the first launch out of Wenchang's new commercial spaceport launch site, by the way, carrying Qianfang, their 1,000 sails constellation, carrying another 18 satellites into polar orbit. This is China's version of Starlink. 12th of March, Falcon 9 launched Sphere X and Punch out of Vandenberg. This is a science mission launched for NASA, carrying, first mission is called Sphere X, a spectral polarimeter for the history of the universe, epoch of reionization, and ICE's explorer, right? So it's basically doing near-infrared observations, doing like a complete all-sky survey. It's sort of like, next generation of NEOWISE. It's going to do like spectroscopy of something like 500 million galaxies, and no doubt get further insight to the expansion of the universe and maybe pin down the Hubble constant, which is, it's a bit of a problem right now. The other mission on this spacecraft was called Punch, polarimeter to unify the corona and heliosphere. It's also known as SMEX-15. It's a mission to basically study the region of the solar corona, right? So they're looking at the solar corona as it interacts with the sun, with the Earth's atmosphere, or the Earth's magnetosphere. So there's actually 4 satellites in this that will go through and observe the heliosphere from different angles. So anyway, great that successfully launched. 13th of March, there was a Starlink launch. I can't believe we've got this far and we have our first Starlink launch. Yes, 21 Starlink satellites grouped 12-21 out of Slick 40 in the East Coast out of Florida. Then on the 14th of March, Falcon 9, Crew 10. Yes, we finally send up another Dragon spacecraft so that, people can finally come home. So crew of Crew 10, it was commanded by Anne McLean, who previously flew to the space station. It has Nicole Ayers. She was, this is the first one from her particular group, the most recent astronaut group to get selected. We have Tayuki Oishi, who is Japanese, and from Russia we have Kirill Peskov. And I did a cool little thing. On Twitter, I went and highlighted what they were all flying. Anne McLean, she's a helicopter pilot. Nicole Ayers, F-22 pilot. Tayuki Oishi, he was actually an airline pilot, 767, and Kirill Peskov flies 757. He's also a Boeing airline pilot. Anyway, that mission's great. They got up to the space station, change of command. It was actually kind of abbreviated for complicated reasons, which I'll go into in a minute. Anyway, moving onwards, on the 15th of March, Rocket Lab came in with an Electron named the Lightning God Reigns. They launched out of Mahia. They were carrying a number of synthetic aperture radar satellites for QPS. This is the first of something like 8 launches where they're going to build out a constellation of synthetic aperture radar satellites. Basically going to do like real-time updates of, Earth surface observations and sell those to customers. 15th of March, we also had a Long March 2D carrying SuperView satellite number 3, I believe, and Tianyan 23. These are all obviously Earth observation satellites going into sun synchronous orbit, and they were launched from Jichuan. Also on the 15th of March, we had SpaceX launch Transporter 13 out of Vandenberg Space Force Base. So yeah, this had a whole bunch of payloads on board. D-Orbit launched their space tug, Marvelous Matthias. ISAR launched 4, of their synthetic aperture radar satellites. NASA had Ilana, experimental launch of nanosatellites. Group 64 and 61. So that included, some science stuff. There was also some other NASA missions that ended up there as part of the heliophysics mission. Varda launched their 3rd re-entering our spacecraft, the Winnebago number 3. And all in all, I lost count of how many, but I did look that we have satellites from USA, Italy, France, Norway, Finland, Spain, Luxembourg, India, the UAE, Israel, UK, South Korea, Singapore, Turkey, Bahrain, and Australia. And if you've got a satellite on there, because I know people that put satellites on this sometimes watch me, congratulations, it's cool getting to space, isn't it? Anyway, again on the 15th of March, we also had SpaceX launching 23 Starlink satellites out of Slick 40, Group 12-16th. Okay, 16th of March, Angara 1.2. Yes, the small Angara launched 3 spacecraft, Cosmos 2585, 86, and 87. These are called Strela or Rodnik number 19. And I believe these are Earth observation satellites. 17th of March, Series 1, China's, galactic energy. Yunyao 55 to 60. These are AirSats and AirSats number 6 and number 7. This launch was called Auld Lang Syne, which as a Scotsman, I appreciate that. I guess, Robert Burns' fame has spread all the way to China so that they name a rocket in his stead or whatever. Yeah, these are meteorology Earth observation satellites. 18th of March, Electron comes up with a high 5. Kinéis, number 5, the 5th. They have launched 5 Kinéis satellites, and this is the 5th of their 5 dedicated launch for this, Internet of Things constellation. So yeah, it's the final launch for that. Rocket Lab have really been, going fast with their launches recently. They're the only people that can seem to get even close to what SpaceX is doing. And, if you take away SpaceX's Starlink launches, then Rocket Lab are pretty competitive, except when, of course, you look at the amount of mass that an Electron carries. But yeah, SpaceX, 18th of March, launched some 23 Starlink satellites from Slick 40. And 21st of March, and I'm saying this now, but it's actually happening in 30 minutes from my point of view. But by the time you see this, it will have happened, hopefully. Otherwise, this is going to be a very different video. But yes, they are supposed to be launching, or they will have launched, NROL 57. So it's part of NRO's proliferated architecture. It's the 8th batch of basically Starshield spacecraft. Yeah, and by the way, if this launches tonight, it will be the fastest turnaround by a booster because they turned it around within 9 days, right? Booster 1088 was the same booster that launched Sphere X and Punch. So that's wild. We're now getting to the point where in a single episode, the same booster can launch twice. How's that for rapid reusability? Anyway, let's come back to the big story. Well, God, there's been so many big stories. But yeah, the previous one, obviously we had IFT8. And the story that was really all over the news was the return of Crew 9, which had, of course, gone up with 2 people and brought back 2 extra people. We had Sunny and Butch, who had originally launched on the Starliner, and they'd spent 8 months on the space station, and they finally got to come home because Crew 10 went up and was able to relieve them. And it's great that they're finally coming back. They look to be in good health. I've seen lots of photos of them afterwards, hugging, high-fiving, feeling good, breathing that fresh air, drinking that water, which wasn't just recycled from your own urine. Yes. It is very cool to see them sort of coming back. And what was even more wild was that after this ordeal, or rather this business as usual, right? They landed in the Gulf and dolphins turned up. And I tell you, if you saw that at the end of The Martian or some like space movie or whatever, and the dolphins turn up to greet the astronauts, you'd be like, oh, that's silly Hollywood garbage. It's like, no, there were actually dolphins there. Dolphins are truly awesome and smart and great. But yeah, I mean, look, this was misreported in a lot of places. Like, I'll tell you what, Space Force, they actually put out a tweet saying that they had just launched Crew 10 and it was going to be bringing back the astronauts. It's like, no, Space Force, you're supposed to understand this, right? You're supposed to know that the one that went up is a different one that's coming back right now. I'm sure we get this from the armed forces, public affairs people, where they post like a happy birthday to the US Navy, and they post a picture of a ship that's from Russia. Or it happens all the time. It's embarrassing. But yeah, Space Force, you're supposed to know about space. Please, do your job. I love you guys. Just don't embarrass me. And there's a bunch of stuff that came up afterwards in the discussion. First of all, obviously we know that there had been some question about whether there was an alternate way back. And as far as we can tell, NASA has confirmed that there were no like secret capsules that were ready and available. They would have had to be refurbished. Obviously the spacecraft, the Dragon spacecraft, had some issues with they were going to launch a new one, and then it had some issues, and then they recycled the old one, 210. But there's still a lot of questions as to whether there was anything secretly offered that would have made any sense. And I haven't heard anyone from NASA say that it would have made sense. But, maybe we could have put some crew in a cargo Dragon or something. So the next thing is, I guess, that the changeover of Crew 10, or not, when Crew 10 got up and Crew 9 came back, that was really truncated. They actually made it shorter, and then they cut it shorter a day, partly because of the issue with the Cygnus spacecraft. We heard last time that it was damaged. That means that it may not be able to fly as soon as possible, so they're making sure that they conserve supplies. So they wanted a shortened switchover time for this, and then they shortened it by another day for weather. Now, of course, the big question is, Starliner, what's going to happen with that? Well, Boeing said, hey, thanks for bringing the crew back, right? I would like to think that Starliner isn't dead completely, because I think that dissimilar redundancy is still a very important thing. And, I'm going to say that if you're a space fan, you should sit back and realize that America is amazing because it's the only country to ever have two different ways of taking astronauts to space, right? And yes, Starliner might be still a half, but we've got Orion coming online. Truly, this is this is unprecedented that a nation has multiple independent ways of bringing people to space. And I think it's important that Starliner will continue, and NASA is currently operating under that presumption. But there might be changes. Steve Stitch reported that there is likely to be a third flight, that it may have no crew on board. They have managed to address 70% of the in-flight anomalies, and hopefully they will get that up to 100%. But yeah, we don't know when that might launch. We know that the next flight after Crew 10 is going to be Crew 11. Crew 12 hasn't officially been put on the schedule, so that would be the earliest that we could get a different Starliner flight going. Anyway, there's a whole lot of story and discussion that goes on about this. Moving onwards, of course, we had two spacecraft going onto the moon, right? And On the same day as IFT-8 was pretty much a repetition of IFT-7, Intuitive Machines IM2 was pretty much a repetition of IM1. And I feel for them here because they solved a lot of their problems, and yet they ended up landing on the moon and falling over again. And people talk about this design saying it's too top heavy, and I disagree. I think the design is totally fine. I think this time it looks like, well, so based on what we figured out, the spacecraft came down and it was sort of slipping sideways across the surface, and at no point did it switch to its like terrain cameras on. So it uses LiDAR to figure out how close it is, and I think at a certain point it will turn on its navigation cameras and it will then use imaging of the surface to figure out to do its final maneuvers and land in a place which doesn't have rocks or a slope that will cause it to fall over. But instead it came down and just sort of slid onto the surface going sideways. And I think that's because there was an issue with the LiDAR. Without the LiDAR, that hazard navigation never switched on. This spacecraft should be able to land just fine. It's just not robust when it lands going sideways 7 times faster than it's going downwards. But of course, at the same time, Firefly had an amazing couple of weeks. We saw some images from their landing last time. We got to see images from the Scalps payload showing the high detail of the rocket exhaust during the landing. We also got to see the Lister drilling into the surface, and it's like a drill which blows gas in, and there's actually these explosions coming up. That was fascinating to watch. It's the deepest drilling that's been done on the moon as far as I know, because there was a deeper one that was supposed to go on a Soviet one, but that broke. There was of course the lunar magnetotelluric sounder, and we got some footage of that throwing out the sensors just like on big long wires, and that's able to perform various measurements, I think, of the crust. We got to see the lunar eclipse, which is, of course, the moon getting obscured by the Earth. We got to see that from the point of view of the moon, and you see this gorgeous red hue from everything. And, of course, we got to see sunset, and hopefully we'll get to see some more pictures from that. It was really awesome, and just a transformative mission, and I'm really glad that that was successful, because it shows that CLIPS isn't just about spacecraft falling over. Yeah, come on, CLIPS, you can do it. Okay, another thing that happened in Vandenberg was that the X-37B came back after 434 days in orbit, and of course it started out in this highly eccentric orbit. It did whatever science and secret tests that it had to do, and then it performed this demonstration of this aerobraking, bringing down the orbit slowly using drag. This is a useful capability. Not only have they shown that they can now put it in these highly eccentric orbits to reach out there and do science or research or whatever they do, but they've also shown that they can use the atmosphere to change the orbit in a way that adversaries may not be able to predict, which is good if you're trying to do secret stuff far from prying eyes. So it would be very cool if I'd seen that happening. One of these days I'd actually like to see it landing. Anyway, moving onwards, Relativity. Remember Relativity? They were going to 3D print all their rockets. Well, after their first flight, they sort of backed away from that. And slowly over time, their new Terran R has been getting less printed, more machined and shaped and formed in some other way. There's definitely still a lot of 3D printing going on, but the really big news with Terran R and Relativity is the CEO, Tim Ellis, is stepping down and is being replaced by Eric Schmidt. Now, you may or may not know that name, but he was the first CEO at Google. And it sounds like he's come in with a lot of his own money. There was some question about whether Relativity was going to be able to survive on the money they had. Well, he's now the third Silicon Valley tech CEO. I guess Jeff Bezos was never Silicon Valley, but he was definitely a .com CEO. And Eric Schmidt was very much the same thing. If you don't know, Eric Schmidt, basically Google was founded by Sergey Brin, Larry Page, and they were doing their tech nerd stuff. And then at some point they were like, God, we need to get a real CEO in to grow this company. And the reason they went with Eric Schmidt was because Eric Schmidt went to Burning Man, and they'd gone to Burning Man, and they realized like this was the kind of person they wanted. And Eric Schmidt still occasionally goes to Burning Man and is seen around there. So he obviously understands combustion. But yeah, they are continuing. They've revealed a number of updates about Terran R with, they were showing some of the panels, the designs for their first and second stage barrels. They showed the Aeon R engine firing. They're not using 3D printed domes anymore. They're being like fabricated out of sections and welded. And I believe they're moving a bunch of their manufacturing to Texas, because if you're assembling your rocket, it's a lot easier if you're having to move it via the Panama Canal, that's a big problem. It's too wide to go on the roads, like SpaceX's Falcon 9. Okay, speaking of moving around, the Hera spacecraft moved around. It flew past Mars. So second spacecraft launched by SpaceX to fly past Mars. And this is on its way to I don't know, what do you call it? Didymos, right? Didymos and Didymoon, or Dimorphos, the asteroid which was hit by the DART mission. So Hera is going to fly there, and it's going to arrive, I think, in December of 2026. But it had to fly by Mars to get a gravity assist. And being that this mission was supposed to look at asteroids, the people managing the mission managed to tweak the orbit just enough that it was able to fly by Deimos, which is the more distant moon of Mars. It's about 12.4 kilometers wide. So they flew past Mars at 9 kilometers per second. They were 5,000 kilometers from Mars, but they were 1,000 kilometers from Deimos, and they were able to use their asteroid imaging stuff to get a very rare image of the far side of Deimos. Normally images of Deimos are taken from low orbit around Mars, so they're looking out, and because the satellite is tidally locked, we only see the side that faces Mars. So this was the other side, which is pretty cool. We also got some cool images of Mars, and they had a little press conference thing, and Brian May from Queen turns up and shows 3D images and stuff because he really likes his asteroids. Okay, Rocket Lab, they bought a satellite laser communications company called Mynaric. They're spending $75 million. Well, actually, no, I think they're spending $150 million. But Mynaric had received something like $300 million worth of investment. But this is like another really useful part of Rocket Lab's capabilities, that are going to be able to build inter-satellite laser communication systems, which is pretty useful if you want to, say, build out a mega constellation and launch it with Neutron. Rocket Lab, despite being called Rocket Lab, a lot of their profits are now coming from selling satellite hardware. China, they have announced that they are opening up their 2028 Tianwen-3 Mars sample return mission to international cooperation. They've basically said there's going to be something like 15 kilograms of payload mass available for international collaborators on the Earth return spacecraft, and there's another 5 that's going to be made available on the Mars orbiter. And so this is, if you've got a scientific instrument and you don't mind working with China, you can possibly get this flown on there. So obviously this doesn't apply to anyone in the US because of the various rules against working with China, but it does mean international collaboration. But Tianwen-3, of course, right now, if it launches on time, and I don't see any reason why it shouldn't, it very likely to beat the US to getting a sample back from Mars, right? There's nothing that is concrete on the charts, on the schedule, which would beat China. Now, to be clear, the US has been carefully selecting awesome samples with the Perseverance rover, and those will be much more scientific value when they get returned whenever, but we don't even know when that is, and we don't know how much it's going to cost, and yeah. Anyway, ULA have said that they have figured out what happened with the Vulcan flight number 2. If you remember one of the boosters, the strap-on boosters from Northrop Grumman, the nozzle broke off. They figured out this is a manufacturing defect. They had to actually recover the spent boosters from the sea, check them to see what was up with them. And so they believe that they have figured out that problem and that Northrop Grumman won't let it happen again. And so they're just wanting to get this spacecraft validated for launch to get into its whole, start dealing with its national security backlog. Having said that, the next mission that ULA will fly will be an Atlas V carrying Kuiper spacecraft, but they're definitely hoping to start flying Vulcan more regularly before the end of the year. Another rocket that has sort of surprised us by getting licensed to launch sooner than we expected is ISAR Aerospace. They have a rocket called the Spectrum, and it's going to launch from Norway's spaceport, right? The Andøya spaceport. And this has previously hosted suborbital launches. It had been licensed for orbital launches. We weren't sure when that was going to happen, but it looks like the first launch is going to happen possibly in the next few days. Now, ISAR's rocket is supposed to carry up to a ton into orbit, and it is different from a lot of other rockets in that it doesn't use kerosene or methane. It's using propane. And propane actually has a lot of advantages in terms of its specific impulse and performance and fuel density. The main downside is that it does tend to lead to higher combustion temperatures, which cause all sorts of mechanical or engineering problems that need to be solved. So yeah, I am looking forward to that in the next few days because it would be the first orbital rocket launch from Europe. And, we'd been hoping to see that from Scotland. We thought we might see that from Cornwall. This is the third time. Will Europe finally get a launch vehicle going orbital? Who knows? But anyway, I'm going to leave you with one final interesting story. You guys might have heard of Barnard's star. It was a star that was, named for Barnard because he noticed that this star had a really high proper motion because it was sort of close to Earth, but it was also moving relatively fast across the sky. It's like a 10 billion year old red dwarf. It's older than the sun, right? And every now and then, people have claimed to have discovered planets around it and then later retracted that. Well, now we're pretty sure that there are in fact planets around it. So the Maroon X instrument on Gemini North was able to observe it over like 3 years. What they're doing is looking at spectral lines, looking at radial velocity changes on this, and they think that they have 4 different planets now that they've identified. They combined the data with another instrument called Espresso that was on the VLT. So these are very small sub-Earth-sized planets that are very close to their parent body. Like the periods are like 3 days, 4 days, 2 days, and maybe 7 days. So these are all very close in. They're like, they're going to be hot. They are not in the zone, the habitable zone. And also the observation rules out any planets bigger than about half an Earth mass in the habitable zone. But yeah, Barnard's star, as I said, it was the first star where somebody claimed to have found evidence of a planet. And it was based on radial velocity measurements. And it turned out that was a false alarm. There have been a couple of other ones since then. But I think this one really looks like real detections. And so, it's kind of cool that after all these false alarms, we finally have planets around Barnard's star. And now I see that SpaceX are launching in a few minutes. So I'm going to say, I'm Scott Manley. Fly safe.